This is the chapter where power stops shouting and starts whispering. Not through a hacked email. Not through a tower deal. Not through one explosive meeting the whole world can see. This chapter moves differently. Because some of the most important influence in politics does not arrive like a scandal. It arrives through access. Through relationships. Through trusted intermediaries. Through private pressure applied far from the cameras. That is chapter 8. And that is why this story matters. Because if you only look for the loudest form of influence, you miss the quieter form that often travels farther. This is the Oligarch Lane. Petr Aven. Richard Burt. Project A. And the reason this chapter lands is simple. It is not about spectacle. It is about proximity. It is about whether powerful people close to wealth, diplomacy, and political access can shape influence without ever needing a headline confession. Power moves quietly. Because the public has been trained to imagine corruption as a dramatic event. A smoking gun. A midnight meeting. A bag of cash. But influence is usually more elegant than that. It moves through the respectable room. The private introduction. The trusted advisor. The person who can place the call no one else can place. That is where this chapter lives. And that is what makes it dangerous. This is not the chapter that proves every private relationship is criminal. And it is not the chapter that claims every elite conversation is a conspiracy. It is colder than that. It is the chapter that shows how influence can travel through high-status networks while still leaving politics altered on the other side. This chapter is not about scandal theater. It is about influence architecture. That matters because architecture stays in place even when the headlines move on. And once you start looking at architecture instead of theater, certain names matter more. Petr Aven matters here because he represents a form of power that works through access, capital, protection, and elite alignment. Richard Burt matters because intermediaries matter. That is one of the deepest truths in this whole series. The intermediary is often more important than the loud ideologue. Because intermediaries make power portable. They translate one world into another. They normalize what would otherwise look suspicious. They make outside influence feel domestic, polished, and respectable. That is what makes this lane so difficult to see in real time. Nothing has to look theatrical. Everything just has to keep moving. That is where Project A enters the chapter's center of gravity. Not as a magic key that explains everything, but as a way of understanding how organized influence can move through private channels, relationship networks, and elite problem-solving structures that rarely announce themselves in public. The point is not whether influence arrives loudly. The point is whether it arrives effectively. And in politics, quiet influence is often the most effective influence of all. That is why this chapter matters politically. Because when public life is being shaped, the public usually notices only the visible pressure. The speech. The scandal. The hearing. The tweet. But by the time those things happen, the quieter work may already be done. The relationship may already be formed. The channel may already be open. The assumptions may already be softened. The access may already be secured. And if that is true, then the real story is not only what was said in public. The real story is who had entry before the public even knew the room existed. That is the force of this chapter. It is a story about influence before visibility. That should make everyone more serious. Because democracies are not only vulnerable to open attack. They are vulnerable to quiet capture around the edges. The dinner, not just the directive. The advisor, not just the propagandist. The relationship, not just the order. This is where many viewers will want a cleaner moral picture. They will want either innocence or indictment. Either total proof or total dismissal. Either a villain or nothing at all. But this chapter resists that. Because influence networks are often most powerful exactly when they remain deniable. That is what makes them useful. No single move has to carry the whole burden. No single conversation has to explain the entire system. No single participant has to look like the mastermind. The lane works because it distributes pressure. That is why elite access matters. That is why private channels matter. That is why protected intermediaries matter. And that is why this chapter belongs where it does in the series. By now, the audience has already seen the loud stories. The hacks. The contacts. The lies. the surveillance failures. Now the series turns to something subtler. The social machinery that lets influence move without ever having to announce itself. If the earlier chapters showed how scandal erupts, this chapter shows how influence incubates. And once you see that, the silence inside the chapter starts speaking. The absences matter. The private setting matters. The discretion matters. The lack of spectacle is not a weakness here. It is the point. Because power that needs to scream is often weaker than power that can stay calm, private, and connected. That is what gives this chapter its chill. Not a single explosive moment. A lane. A structure. A soft pressure world where access itself becomes leverage. And that is why viewers should not ask only, was there one criminal act that explains everything? Sometimes the more important question is, what kind of influence environment was being built? That question cuts deeper. Because environments outlast headlines. If powerful people close to oligarch money, diplomatic channels, and American political access can move through private lanes without public scrutiny, then the issue is bigger than one event. It is about whether the edges of democratic life were softer than the public understood. That is why this chapter matters. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is not built around one viral quote. It is built to show the viewer how influence actually survives, through proximity, through access, through discretion, through people whose greatest political value is that they do not look theatrical at all. So if the world asks what Chapter 8 really proves, the answer is this: power does not always move through scandal. It often moves through relationships, through elite intermediaries, through private channels that shape access before the public ever sees the result. That is the Oligarch Lane. That is why Petr Aven matters. That is why Richard Burt matters. That is why Project A matters. Not because one image solves the whole case, but because together they reveal the quiet mechanics of influence. That is the payoff. Not corruption as performance. Influence as infrastructure. And once you understand that, you start seeing the rest of the series differently. Because the loud events were never the whole story. Sometimes the real force was moving quietly beside them the entire time. And the next chapter pushes deeper into that world, where access, power, and hidden channels stop looking like side details and start looking like the system itself. The parent, the teacher, the nurse, our mission. Big hugs, Big Dave. Support democracy by supporting Ukraine directly through United 24 media, links in description. Subscribe not to miss our weekly deep dive into Russia, Trump 15 and total 1K in videos for your interest.